good to be back. We're keeping this a safe space. It's apolitical, okay? In Chabad, we don't talk politics or religion. We're starting chapter 13. I love our pace. It's a little more relaxed. Last time I had to prepare a full chapter every class. It was a lot. You couldn't really appreciate the richness of each individual chapter, but now we're getting a little more time to delve into the ideas. So there's value to both, and we do what we do. I don't have any resolution. People asked me about last week's conversation, if the WhatsApp chat continued discussing the issue. We didn't come to a conclusion, but that's how Tanya is. It's like the Torah. It's infinite. You come around again, and next year there's more. And there's always more. There was a Rebbe whose name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kosov. He led a small Chassidic court in the city of Kosov. That's why he was called the Kosover Rebbe. And he had a brother whose name was Yitzchak, who was a big, successful businessman who supported him. He did his things, and then part of the profit would go to paying for the Rebbe's personal needs. There was a misnagid in the city. Misnagid is the opposition. Very antagonistic to Rabbi Menachem Mendel. Made many problems for him throughout his career. But then, as they say, there's no atheist in foxholes, right? This antagonist needed to marry off his daughter. And he didn't have any money. So what do? He went to the local tzaddik. He went to the Kosover Rebbe. He asked for an audience. And he said, look, let bygones be bygones, but I need help. I have a daughter. She's marriageable age. I have no way to pay for the wedding. At least if I can have some tips, maybe you can give me some insight. I know your brother is a businessman. Maybe you can give me some ways, some ventures that I could go into to make some money for the wedding. So the Kosover Rebbe says, you know what? Let me see what I have right here. He pulls out his drawer, takes out a couple of 100 rubles, which was a fortune at the time. And he says, you know what? Take this money and use it to pay for the wedding. So, of course, word got around that the Rebbe helped this person who was so against him for all these years with personal money. And word got back to his brother. And his brother was very upset. I gave you the money. The whole way you have to support yourself is through my business. I know how many problems this guy makes for you. Now you're going and giving him money for the wedding? So he runs into his brother's room and starts screaming at him. How could you do that? What did you do? You gave money to the guy who hates you. Da 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 da. So the Kosover Rebbe looks at him. He goes, you know, it's funny. Just a couple of moments ago, there was somebody else in this room that was saying the exact same thing as you. He also wanted to know why I gave away so much money. And for reasons known to me, I had to ignore him, and I'm also going to ignore you. So he says, really? Who was this? Who was the guy that agreed with me? So he said, my Yetzer Hara. My evil inclination. He also wanted to know why I'm giving away so much money. And it was time to ignore him, and we're going to ignore you too. And of course the message is that not every time do we have to listen to what the negative voice inside us says. Sometimes the even deeper, true moral compass, the spark of the divine inside us, gives us the real truth of how we have to proceed in a given case. And that's exactly the opening point of chapter 13. Raise your hand if you've been here since chapter 1. Everyone? Wow, okay, wonderful. At this round 2, Tanya 2.0.
I couldn't pass a quiz, I don't think.
That is
Well, you know what? Thank God we're not doing any pop quizzes. But chapter 1, if we can remember that far back, opened up with a series of questions. Because that's how Chassidus has always been taught. You quote a passage or a piece of the Talmud or some kind of quotation from the literature. You examine it by asking questions. The questions open up a portal into a new gate of understanding. You get treated to a lecture, and then at the end of the lecture, the questions are answered. So the Tanya is structured in the same way. Page 1, a whole bunch of questions. Not just one quote, 5 or 6 or 7 quotes, comparing, contrasting, and none of them get answered in chapter 1. They all get answered throughout the Tanya. So for chapter 13, at this point, is the first time we get to return to 2 of the questions. More, but 2 tonight from chapter 1. So, because as Abba Eben said, we couldn't all pass a quiz, I'm just going to do a little recap, right? A little reminder of what it did say in chapter 1. And here I found something very interesting, actually, as I was looking up the relevant sources for the class. There's a passage in the Talmud, close to the end of the first tractate, of Tractate Brachos. The Talmud says there are 3 types of people. There's a tzaddik, a rasha, and a benoni. These are 3 personalities that we're very familiar with now, having studied about them for a number of chapters. Says the Talmud, the tzaddik, yetzer toiv shoiftan. The tzaddik is judged by the good inclination. Rishayim yetzer hara shoiftan. The wicked are judged by their evil inclination, the negative inclination. Beinonim zeh vazeh shoiftan. The in-betweeners, the average men, this one and this one judge them. And the Talmud brings a verse. It's in Tehillim, it's in Psalms. Ki ya'amod limin evyon. Describes God. It says, God stands by the side of the destitute, of the pauper, lo'hishia mishoiftei nafshay, to save him from the judges of his soul. So the verse uses the term judges in the plural. That means that some people have plural judges for their soul. And who is that? That's the average guy. That's what the Gemara says. Now, the Alter Rebbe, in chapter 1, basically was trying to figure out what is the core difference between the tzaddik, the Beinoni, and the rasha. It sounds like from this that the Beinoni has both voices, kind of half and half. Sometimes he's controlled by this one, sometimes he's controlled by that one, while the tzaddik is never controlled by the bad, he's always controlled by the good. But the Alter Rebbe proved from multiple sources that even a Beinoni never fails in the practical. Even the Beinoni never compromises, never gives in. So how are we to understand this piece of Talmud of this one and that one judges him? So the Alter Rebbe says the secret lies in the word judge. It doesn't say that the Beinoni is ruled by both of them. In Hebrew, you would say zeh vazeh moshlim. This one and that one rule. It doesn't say rule, it says judge. And by the way, as a parenthesis, if I can make a little correction here to the Artscroll Gemara, the Artscroll English Schottenstein edition, when they translate this piece of Talmud, they actually translate shoftan as rule. Even though, parenthetically also, it's one of the only places they reference Chabad Chassidic thought in their notes. They reference the Tanya in explaining that piece of Talmud. But it's a little bit of a mistranslation. They translate it as rule. The Alter Rebbe over here has a whole exposition that ruled is an incorrect translation. Because what does rule mean? Rule means control. If you say a tzaddik is ruled by one inclination, a rasha is ruled by the other inclination, and a Beinoni is ruled by both, rule connotes control. That means that who controls the behavior of a tzaddik? Only one inclination, the good one. Who controls the behavior of the rasha? Only one inclination, the evil one. Who controls the behavior of the Beinoni? Both. That would mean that the Beinoni sometimes behaves in accordance with the good soul, other times behaves in accordance with the negative soul, with the animal soul. But that's not true. As we've learned, the Beinoni is in complete control of thought, speech, and action. So therefore, the secret is the word judge. And the best way to look at it is to imagine a physical court. I don't know if this would work in American courts because we don't have the same system as the Torah, but let's go with the Torah system of courts. The Torah system of courts is that on a basic level, every court is formed from 3 judges. Do you know that? When you go to a monetary case, there's 3, a Beit Din, 3 rabbis on the court. And by the way, just also as a parenthesis, interesting piece of Jewish legislation, when you go before an American court, you can't pick your judge. Okay, but you're not supposed to be able to pick your judge. But in Jewish law, you're actually supposed to. In Jewish law, it says, Zeh b'rer lo echad v'zeh b'rer lo echad. Each litigant is supposed to pick one judge, and then the two judges pick a third judge. So each litigant feels equally represented in court, so to speak, and the two judges together, if they can agree on the third judge, that means he's impartial and he'll give the final ruling in case of dispute. So what do you have? You have three judges on a court, yeah? Two litigants come, they're fighting. So what happens? In the beginning, the judges do not rule anything. They just render an opinion. The first judge gives his opinion. Here's my opinion. This is what I think the law should be. The second judge also gives an opinion. Sometimes it's in consent. Sometimes it's in dissent. Very possibly, in the case that I mentioned before, where both litigants are picking their own judge, the initial judges are going to be at odds. And then you have the mediator, the third judge, who kind of brings them both together. In fact, in Jewish law, when it comes to courts, there's a lot of fascinating laws when it comes to judges. One of the big guiding principles is that after a case is heard before the court, the lowest judge is the one who speaks first. Even though out of respect, you would want to give the smartest or the wisest judge or the oldest judge or the most experienced judge.
So lowest meaning
youngest, least quality, least senior judge must speak first. Why? Because there's a bias. Once a lower level judge hears what a greater level judge has to say, now he starts rethinking his own opinion. It won't reflect truly his thoughts. So we let him speak first. We actually make him speak first. And then you get to the greater judges and they weigh in or whatever it is. Point being that judges, until the ruling is issued, they're nothing more than people that are stating opinions. And in no way does a judge's opinion reflect what's actually going to happen. Until you have a majority or a final ruling or a unanimous ruling, then you'll know. So the Alter Rebbe says, this is the secret of this piece of Talmud about the tzaddik, the Benoni, and the Rasha. The tzaddik and the Rasha, they don't have a panel. There's only one judge. There's only one opinion even being offered in the court, and therefore, obviously, that's the opinion that's followed. The tzaddik only has the positive, godly judge. The Rasha only has the selfish, animalistic judge. But the Benoni, he's got both judges. Meaning what? He has multiple opinions being raised within his consciousness. God forbid that in the end of the day, practically, he should act in accordance with what the animalistic judge says. But the animalistic judge has a voice, and does he have a voice. As I mentioned to you multiple times, if you could do a soul x-ray, if you could do a spiritual MRI on the souls of a tzaddik, Benoni, and a Rasha, you bring three specimens. You bring a tzaddik, you bring a Benoni, and you bring a Rasha, you put them under the spiritual MRI. You're going to reveal not three types of people, two. There's going to be type A and type B. The tzaddik will be type A because he has a different makeup. There is no battle anymore. He's chased out the negativity, and that's all that speaks is Hashem. But inside the Benoni and the Rasha, you're going to see the exact same thing. The raging battle of lust and desire. Outside, whole different world. Benoni never gives in. Rasha is always giving in to different degrees, but at least sometimes he gives in. But inside, the Benoni is facing the battle, living the battle, struggling the battle like every single one of us. And that's the secret of the judges. He's walking down the street, and he passes by something, a billboard or an ad. Comes the judge inside him and raises his opinion. We should go do that, see that. Or not, we should go. Right, last week that was the whole thing. If a Benoni has some thoughts, subjective thoughts, I'm not going to get into that whole argument. But the point is, there's an opinion being stated about the goodness or the value of this negative act. But the moment that opinion rises from the heart to the brain, where the godly soul, the godly judge is located, the godly judge stands up, bangs the gavel, order in the court, and states his opinion, which is always in complete opposition, of course, to the first judge. And now you have two judges in conflict. Who wins?
Whoever he says. He's the third judge.
We need the third judge. And who's the...
He's the third judge.
No.
Hashem.
Who's the third judge? Hashem. That's the verse we mentioned before. Ki yamod li min evyon lehoshia mishoftei nafsho. God stands by the pauper to save him from the judges of the soul. That verse isn't just telling us the fact that some people have two judges. It's giving us insight into how that courthouse looks. There's two conflicting voices inside the Beinoni. And then, says the Alter Rebbe, there's a divine light of assistance that's granted by God himself to the godly soul that allows him to be victorious and for that opinion to win. And practically, in thought, speech, and action, the Beinoni succeeds in staying true to the Torah way, to God's way. Now, why does a divine soul need divine assistance? If you're already, isn't the godly soul already godly? Why does it require assistance from God? Or how does God assist it?
How are you defining assistance?
Or how are you defining assistance? The Yetzer Hara is so powerful. But the Yetzer Tov, isn't the soul a piece of God?
Yeah.
So what does it mean that God comes and assists the soul?
I mean, as a human, you have a godly soul, and he created us in his image, or whatever the nomenclature is, but we're human. So the soul we're not one with our soul.
Very good. Very, very good. The Rebbe himself actually asked this question at a Farbrengen in the summer of 1984. And that's kind of what he explained. He said the soul is a paradox. The soul, in chapter 2 we did say, Chilek Eloka mimal mamash, it's literally a piece of God above. But the thing about a soul is that God wants the soul to become autonomous. It wants the soul to fuse with the body and become this new entity. And what happens is, when you put a soul in a body and you ask it to lead the body on the journey of life, the soul loses its connection with its core divinity. So while it's godly, but it loses that focus, that being in the zone. As happens to us, right? We get into a zone of inspiration or a moment of spirituality, and there's clarity all around. And then we have to carry it back into life, and we lose touch with it. It's like, man, if only I could return to that moment when I was on a high. But you can't. You have to take that moment and you have to bring it into your life. So you can get kind of divorced from it. So the divine assistance allows the soul a glimpse back into its core self. So really, really, it's not actually three judges. It's the first judge getting further empowered by the best version of himself. But it's still called the third entity for the purpose of the argument we're making over here. Point being that the Beinoni has two opinions being stated, but in the end he always follows through with the right one.
Does the Beinoni receive that assistance as, would you say, as a merit or as like a chesed?
Chesed,
Yeah.
not a merit. Not every Beinoni deserves that. As a matter of fact, it's very interesting you just asked that. It just reminded me there's a note on the Tanya from the Rebbe. I should bring the book once. It's a fascinating discovery that was made after the Rebbe's passing. They found in his desk drawer binders of handwritten notes. Tiny, tiny script. Obviously written for no one else to see, just for himself. Because it was written in very shorthand.
Yiddish?
Hebrew. All Hebrew. a mix of diaries and Torah thoughts. Whenever he was by his father-in-law, he kept a meticulous diary of every single movement that his father-in-law made. He kept track of everything. Everything for him was like a Chabad custom. Because if you watch a Rebbe do a Seder or do a Rosh Hashanah meal, every move he makes is precise. And he wrote everything, and that's how we have today access to many, many little tidbits of information about how the previous Rebbe acted. But then also, in addition to that, the Rebbe wrote his Torah thoughts as he was just learning clearly on his own. Some of the most profound genius of the Rebbe is found in those diaries. As a matter of fact, the seeds for much of what the Rebbe would teach later was found in those diaries, because all those diaries were written in the 30s and the 40s, before the Rebbe even came to the mantle of leadership. Most of it before the Rebbe even came to America, period. But some of it also afterwards. And there are many thoughts in shorthand form that 20, 30 years later the Rebbe would expound upon. And now, after this was discovered, it made a lot more sense. Like you can see the Rebbe's thinking almost developing. And there was some unfinished projects that the Rebbe had begun, clearly, and never managed to finish because he was just super busy. And one of them was a comprehensive commentary on the Tanya. Little notes and sources for every line in the Tanya. And these gems, this like half one-liners and 3 sentences, and the Rebbe resolves questions and Kabbalah and all this kind of stuff. So there's a note on this chapter from the Rebbe where he asks an interesting question. He says, why does the Benoni need a divine assistance? What do you mean divine assistance? In chapter 12, I don't know if it was last class or 2 classes ago, we spoke at length how the Alter Rebbe's proposition is that naturally, the way a person is born, moach shalit al halev, your brain rules the heart. So long as you're meditating properly, your mind can will itself to control every emotional urge in the heart. So if it's a natural state of being, why don't we need the divine assistance? Naturally, the Benoni will control. When the first judge says his opinion and brings his urge from the heart to the mind will say, that's it, we're done. I don't care that you're having an urge, the mind rules the heart. So if in chapter 12 we already said, moach shalit, we shouldn't need divine assistance. So the Rebbe writes that actually, and if you look carefully you can see it in the nuance of the text, the Alter Rebbe here is discussing a different type of Benoni. There's different models of the Benoni. The bottom line is the same. They all don't act out. Thought, speech, and action, they're in full control. But there are different types. One is called, or we'll just call it, the inspired Benoni. Or I think in this book he calls it the enlightened Benoni. And one is the uninspired Benoni, or the unenlightened Benoni. Meaning, in chapter 12, the Alter Rebbe said that a Benoni begins his day in prayer. Very strong contemplative prayer. Heats up the oven. And then there's a residue, a remnant of the inspiration which stays all day with him and helps him act the way he's supposed to. But it seems like that for some Benonis, that inspiration wears off. After a couple of hours, it's just not hot enough. And once you get towards the afternoon, the fire is not on anymore. And because of that, the Benoni's inside lends more credence to the evil voice. And then the brain cannot be in power. And this is a major psychological principle the Rebbe alludes to in very shorthand. The brain can only rule the heart if the brain is sure.
The brain is what?
Sure. Confident. Sure. If the brain is unsure, it cannot lead the heart. Even if you're a brain, and this is the heart. But the brain has to have a single-minded perspective that's not shaky. The moment you introduce a little doubt, now the brain's not going to be able to do its job. And if the brain can't do its job, that means that the impulse might go past the brain's power, even though it opposes what's about to happen, but the heart's impulse is too strong, and the mind says, we shouldn't do this, but now we're clashing, and I'm not strong enough to rein you in or to harness the power because it's too long after davening, and now my heart is a little bit too much in control. The battery is low. So here comes the divine assistance.
You assuming, or it sounds like there's an assumption that we know we can distinguish the Yetzer Hara from the Yetzer Tov.
Yes.
But not everybody can. Or the Yetzer Hara could be disguised as the
Wow.
Yetzer Tov, or so, like our personality can get, or if you're
That's a big thing.
and you
I wasn't even going to get into that,
voice,
but you mentioned something very, very powerful. You know, it says in Hayom Yom, the Rebbe's book of adages, day by day, he says the worst type of Yetzer Hara is the Chassidic Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara that says, you know, your wife needs you at home, but you should stay all night studying Torah. You know? Or the Yetzer Hara that says, it's time to daven, but you should stay with friends and inspire them and farbring. Whatever, he gives a bunch of examples there. Everyone has their own Hasidic Yetzer Hara. And it sounds Hasidic. It sounds holy. But it's unholy.
How would you say to distinguish better
Yeah.
between which one?
You have to be able to distinguish. I think everyone knows in their own. Like there's different ways. You know, it says by Korach. By Korach, he rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So and he also had some cohorts. He had some helpers. There was Datan and Aviram and all these people. So the Torah, at one point, it says that they died. Korach and his henchmen died. Behatzotam al Hashem, when they argued against God. So the commentaries ask, what did they argue against God? They argued against Moshe. They didn't argue against God. So one of the Chassidic Rebbe said that was exactly part of their trick. The only person who knew they were really evil was God. To the outside, they sounded holy. Their argument sounded like it was for the sake of heaven. We're not trying to be egotistical or selfish. We just want equality. Everybody heard Torah at Mount Sinai. We don't need these leaders. It was a holy argument, so to speak. The Jews didn't perceive it so much as a rebellion. Only God perceived it as a rebellion because it looked pretty noble. Those are the trickiest Yetzer Haras. I think it's part of the Benoni's job. It's part of everybody's job to be able to know who to listen to and what's coming from the right place, what's coming from the wrong place. There's a story actually that the Rebbe once said in, I think it was 1987, they used to have on this one Shabbat, there was it's like on a specific Shabbat every year, there was a Malava Malka, which is the meal after Shabbat, to support some organization in Crown Heights. And it was one of the rare times that the Rebbe would allow somebody to interrupt his Farbrengen on Shabbat and give a speech. One of the Gabbais would take a stand and he would give a little pitch, like a fundraising thing, you know, everybody come tonight and give a lot of money, we need money and we need support. And the Rebbe always said that he has to say a Dvar Torah. Before he makes the appeal, he has to say a Torah thought. Now, who's going to say a Torah thought in front of the Rebbe? So he would always say a story. That was his thing. He said a story, and that was. So he said a story. Without boring you with all the details, the Rebbe actually corrected the story later and kind of emended it. But the bottom line of it is that there was a Hasidic Rebbe who, like many Rebbes, had people that would bring him money. Besides asking for blessings, they would bring him their tzedakah money, and the Rebbe would apportion it as he saw fit. What is it? It's not working? It's good. So at one point, there was a big sum that had accumulated. And then somebody came in to the Rebbe for a private audience, and he was crying that he has, same story as the beginning. He has a wedding to make, and there's no money. What am I going to do? And the Rebbe said, how much do you need? He said, 300 rubles. And it happened to be that the total collected sum for that day so far that had come into the fund was 300 rubles. So the Rebbe's initial thought was, that's it, it's all for you. But then another thought came to him. He said, why should I give all 300 to this guy? Online, there's 15 other Jews that are going to need money. So better, I'll split it up and I'll give just part, but more Jews will benefit. But then in the end, he gave the full amount to the first guy. And he explained later, he said, I knew that the second thought didn't come from a good place. The first thought was the initial reaction of a Jew. That's typically the godly instinct. The second thought was like, maybe we shouldn't give the whole thing. He's already sowing doubt. Once you're sowing doubt, that's not coming from a good place. So you have to be able to discern. Because there are two judges. They don't work as a team. They're not interested in each other's victory. It happened to me also. Personally, I sometimes I have extra money that comes in and I always want to give tzedakah. And I like to give it in bulk, usually, whatever the 10% is, let's just give it, or 20%. So I came across this one organization that needed something, and I wanted to help them. And then my other thought was wait, but if I can give them half the money, they're anyways having a campaign, they're going to collect the money, and then I'll give the other half to somebody else. But it was the same thing for me. I just knew that was coming from a negative place. For me, at that time, I had to give all the money to one. That was what was required. At a different time, you can give small little donations to other people. There's enough to go around.
You're second guessing.
Exactly.
What Hashem wants to do.
Exactly. Once you're second guessing, that's already not so kosher. That's already not so kosher. Sometimes the Yetzer Hara is dressed up as the good guy. It's like my uncle once told me. He's like, if you watch these videos of criminal cases, so sometimes you hear the accusation, right, that this is what this guy did, and then you've never seen him before, and you watch him walk into the court with a suit and tie, and he looks so elegant, and your mind has this not wanting to understand,
Disconnect.
yeah,
This is great. Look at this guy.
look at this guy, he's sharp, he's this, he's the criminal, but yeah, that not every person who's dressed in a suit and tie and looks the part means that he's a straight shooter. So you have to know when the Yetzer Hara is dressed up. You have to know when he's dressed up in a suit and tie, and when he looks halik, like he looks holy. I don't know how I got carried away with that whole discussion, but the core thing was about the assistance, that it's a chesed, it's a kindness from Hashem to allow even those uninspired godly souls to give them the boost that they need, reconnect them to their essence, and allow them to win. The Beinoni always comes out on top because he has this divine assistance. Now, he can't get too cocky. He can't get ahead of himself. That's the other side of the Beinoni. The Beinoni has to always be aware that while he has this assistance, the battle is still there. And this answers another question from chapter 1. And this is literally the first question of the whole Tanya. So if you remember, mamash, the first few lines, what does it say in the first lines of Tanya? That as a soul is about to come into this world, it's made to take an oath. And the oath has two parts. First of all, they say, be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha. We're going to address that in chapter 14. So hang on that. But then it says, this is the key line, even if the entire world tells you you're a tzaddik, heyeh be'einecha kirasha, be in your eyes like a rasha. So the Alter Rebbe asked, how could you say that? It says clearly in Ethics of Our Fathers in Pirkei Avot, ve'al tihi rasha b'fnei atzmecha, don't be a rasha in your own eyes. Blatant contradiction. You say, don't be a rasha in your own eyes, but then you say, even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, be like a rasha. So again, it's the nuance. You have to pay attention here, not only to the words, but to the syllables, to the letters. The Mishnah says, don't be a rasha in your eyes. The Talmud says, be in your eyes like a rasha. Based on what we've learned, who is like a rasha? Not a rasha himself. Like a rasha. Who's like a rasha? A Benoni. A Benoni is like a rasha. He is not a tzaddik. Even though people, so the Talmud says the world will tell you you're a tzaddik. Why? Because what does the world see? The world sees a person who acts perfectly. When you look at the outside of a Benoni, what do you see? Expertise, excellence, no failures, no mistakes. So what do they say? What does the world tell a person that makes no mistakes? You must be a tzaddik. You must have succeeded in the battle, chased away the good. You have chased away the bad. You have nothing bad in your consciousness. Says the Talmud to the Benoni, even if the entire world tells you you're a tzaddik, always be in your eyes like a rasha. In other words, remember that at any moment you can fall off the deep end. Your inside has not been transformed. Your soul and your animal soul are still fighting just like a rasha. Do not take the credit for your success. Like if you have two guys, and you give one person a handsaw and the other person an electric saw, and you say, go, chop down trees. And somehow, miraculously, the guy with the electric saw is chopping down trees much faster than the guy with the handsaw, right? And then the guy with the electric saw, after 10 minutes, he's like, ha ha, look how many trees I'm cutting down. I'm so much better than you. No, you're not. You have the better tool. You don't take credit for chopping down more trees because you have the electric saw. The Benoni must look at the rasha and understand that he is exactly the same as him. He's got the divine assistance. He's got the extra thing in his back pocket that because, thank God, for whatever reason, he has elevated himself to this level, Hashem is coming to his aid every single time, making sure he wins the battle. But therefore you're a tzaddik? Therefore you're better than the rasha? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, and I want to read these lines inside, if you have the Tanya, let's check out page 156. 156 at the bottom, says the Alter Rebbe, do not believe the world's opinion. You are a tzaddik. As this would mean that the evil in you has been voided by the good, top of 157. And this is very unlikely to be true since this is the level of a tzaddik, which is a rare phenomenon. Rather, here's the Alter Rebbe's words of caution to the Benoni. In your eyes, you should look at yourself as if the deep core of evil remains with its full inborn strength in your heart's left chamber, and it has not budged or departed from you whatsoever. He gives some good commentary here. If a Benoni would look at himself as a tzaddik, he would imagine that his battle with evil is over. So he might lower his guard and relax to some extent. Therefore, the sages stress that a Benoni is essentially like a rasha, in whom the Yetzer Hara is as strong as ever in the heart. With such strong negative energy lurking below the surface, it would be a grave error for the Benoni to relax his vigil for even a moment. Because you haven't changed. Fundamentally, you haven't changed. I said it before, it's like an addict in recovery. The moment the addict begins to believe that he's transformed is the moment he's most prone to fail. You have to consistently acknowledge that you're on the cusp of falling back in. And that's how you stay strong. The Alter Rebbe adds even more, and that's the last paragraph I want to read. On the contrary, not only has your animal soul failed to weaken, but with the passing of time it has actually become stronger because you have made extensive use of it through eating, drinking, and other worldly activities. Let's read the commentary, it's a great metaphor. The animal soul is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Even if all its desires are kosher, the fact that it drives you to eat and enjoy other pleasures daily gives it strength. The Rebbe would always quote this, even though in context it's part of a perspective, right? It's what the Benoni has to look in his eyes. That's how we should see it. But it's also a reality of sorts, in which we have to acknowledge that as we continue to use our animal soul, it gets stronger and stronger. So the Rebbe would say, if the animal soul is a muscle and can be strengthened just by use, so we have to combat, and the godly soul we have to also do better. Make it into a muscle. You have to exercise your godly soul daily. No such thing as a day goes by without tefillin, without Torah, without kosher, without something to exercise, to give some reps to the godly soul. And let's just conclude with a short story. that I think carries this message home. Wherever we land on the spectrum, we could use this message. The Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra, one of the greatest biblical commentators, 12th century. He was once traveling, kind of somewhat incognito, and he ended up in a certain city, needed a place to stay. So he found a Jewish home, and the Jewish person took him in. Somehow, word got out that the Ibn Ezra is in town, and Jews from all over started gathering around this guy's house. And he couldn't figure out why. So he goes out and he talks to some people, and basically he realized that he's hosting the Ibn Ezra. He had no idea. So he comes, knocks on the Ibn Ezra's door. He says, "Rabbi, you have to forgive me, please. I'm so embarrassed." He says, "What are you embarrassed about?" He says, "I didn't know who you were. I didn't know who I'm hosting." He says, "What's the problem? You treated me so well. It's not like you acted negatively to me. You hosted me beautifully." So he said, "Yeah, but had I known who you were, I would have served you that much better." So the Ibn Ezra got teary-eyed. He turned his head to heaven and he said, "God, I treat you well, but had I known, or if I would really know who you are, I would treat you that much better." That's the journey of our life. The Benoni lives there, but even he struggles. We have to get to know God a little better, a little more personal, and treat him a little better. L'chaim.